All right, I'm Dr. Chalmers. Yesterday we talked about, Path to Pros. Yesterday we talked about my issue with the calories in, calories out model. Quick recap. If you believe in, calories out, because proteins and carbohydrates are both 4 calories per gram, then you have to believe that protein and carbohydrates work equally in the body. They're exactly the same. That's one of the major fallacies that we have. And so to expound on that, we're going to talk a little bit about somatotyping today. So somatotyping has to deal with the outward appearance of what lifestyle or lifetime has done with the way your body's metabolism works. So you end up with 3 major categories, but there's an infinite range between the two, between each individual position. So you start off with the ectomorphs. These are the people who can eat anything they want, as much as they want, whenever they want, and never gain an ounce. So it sounds really great for a lot of people who are on the endomorph side, the other side of the spectrum. But the problem we run into is that those guys can't gain weight. And so it's really difficult for them to gain weight. And so the way that we have to fix that is we have to really focus in on the chemistry. Those are the guys who need the white rice. Those are the guys who need the oatmeal. Those are the guys who need the fruit juices and things like that, and the higher levels of testosterone and things like that in order to gain weight. So the people who can't gain weight, it's not something that can't be fixed. You just have to understand the chemistry and lean into it a little bit more. So the ectomorph guys are usually not talked about when we talk about weight and stuff like that, because they're not trying to lose weight. And so in the weight loss or the weight management market, they've excluded all of those people, which is about 20-30% of the population. So that's why they're never talked about. That's why, we all know that we have friends who can eat whatever they want to, never gain an ounce. They can eat 10,000 calories a day, never gain an ounce. Or if we watch them eat, we'll get fat, that type of thing. That's why the ectomorph, that's why their bodies function that way. And so what we end up having to do is really, really customize and get that glycemic function really high for those guys. Now, the middle set, we call these the mesomorphs. These are the guys that the calories in, calories out thing works really well for, because their body processes and deals with sugars just as well as it deals with fats. So if you decrease the total amount of either one of those nutrients consumed, the body will lean on its own fat stores, burn the fat, and that's where the weight loss ends up happening. So the calories in, calories out thing only really happens for the dead center mesomorphs. Like I said, there's a spectrum between. So there's ecto, there's meso, and there's everything in between. And so you can be meso-ecto, you can be ecto-meso. It just kind of depends on how you're in there. Figuring out how that works for you isn't super difficult. But once you kind of figure out where you are and how your glycemic function matters, that's how we start programming how your macro set's going to be, which makes it a little bit different for every person, which means that you can't sell prepackaged diet plans to everybody, which is one of the major reasons that we have that a lot of trainers have issues with it. Now, on the other side of the meso is the endomorphs. That's where I live. So these are the guys who, can eat the low calorie diet and still get fat. They can get fatter on eating less calories than they're supposed to. That calorie deficit they're supposed to be in, that's where it really kind of breaks down. So like I was that 300-pound guy. I was that giant fat guy who was eating my whole grains, eating my, really the white rice, the brown rice, and the oatmeals, and doing all that type of stuff, and being really, really careful, having no idea that glycemic function is more important than caloric function. So I was always fat. And so when I started looking at the calories issue and realizing the calories thing really wasn't the issue, it was more of a chemical thing, and I started learning the metabolism, learning the biochemistry. That's where this stuff really started to come into play. So if you can't gain weight, or if you're having trouble losing weight, stop looking at the calories and start looking at the chemistry that's in those calories. Most of the time, we're going to have to look at the carbohydrates. Like I said, protein can never make you fat. It's not going to happen. But when you start looking at carbohydrates, you have to start looking at the glycemic index or the glycemic load. What that is how quickly that carbohydrate turns into sugar, and then how big the response is insulin-wise. So one of the major ways we get fat, yes, you can store fats that you eat, not that big of a deal, but specifically on the carbohydrates, one of the big ways we get fat is that we consume a carbohydrate that has a very high glycemic index. Take white rice, jasmine rice, oatmeal. I keep mentioning those specifically because we see athletes on them all the time. They have a very high glycemic load. Some of those are 80, 90. Donuts are about 100. So if you're trying to figure out how that works, think of donuts as 100, and white rice is, in that 80 to 90 range. Low glycemic, for those of you wondering, 30 to 40 on the scale. So what ends up happening is that you consume this carbohydrate that has a very high glycemic index. That food instantly turns into sugar, puts a giant amount of sugar in the blood, and the body freaks out and goes, oh my gosh, this is way more sugar than we want. And so it has a giant insulin response. That insulin response then pushes that sugar into the musculature. Whatever can't fit in the musculature will then go to the liver and be turned into fat for storage. So when people are eating these foods, they're trying to lose weight, but they're actually, the way the chemistry works, they're storing more of that energy for later use. That's how they're getting fat. And so what also will happen, I talk to my athletes about this all the time. I'm like, hey, after you eat, about 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour after you eat, do you get real tired? And people are like, yeah, actually, I just felt like it was because of this or that, but yeah, I'll eat, and then like 45 minutes later, I get really tired. Oftentimes, what that's a sign of is your body had plenty of sugar, and you sugared everything, and then your body freaked out, pushed all that sugar out of the blood. You no longer have a fuel source to run on, and so your body starts shutting down. So this is one of those big issues when we talk about Ozempic or semaglutide. If you're going to be in a glucose-fed state, which is where your body's running on glucose instead of fats, then what's going to end up happening is that every time your blood sugar starts to get low, your body will either start shutting down, or it will start ripping apart your muscle tissue to get amino acids so that it can use those amino acids in the liver to go through something called gluconeogenesis, where it makes its own sugar. Once it makes its own sugar, then it can feed the blood, it can feed the brain, it can feed the muscles, all those things. But that's the issue. So typically what we have to do for those guys, and I use semaglutide a lot for actresses and things like that who need to lose 20, 30 pounds in a month or so. The first thing we've got to do is we've got to make sure that we get those people into a fat oxidizing state. Then we use semaglutide to start the fasting process. But if you start fasting in a glucose-fed state, what ends up happening is that your body will realize it needs more sugar and start tearing apart your muscle tissues. Brecca talks about this a little bit. There's a lot of guys who are talking about this. When I talk about working out in a fasted state, what I'm talking about is I've been in basically the fat oxidizing state or ketosis. They're not the same thing, but for the sake of this principle, they are. When you're in that state, you can go ahead and work out fasted. You can not eat for a day or two and work out and get great workouts because your body's using your fat to provide your ATP. Now, what I always do is I provide a lot of supplementation to provide the nutrition. So your body has the CoQ10, it has the methylated B vitamins, it has all the amino acids, it has all those things to maintain metabolic chemical function. And so it's not just trying to figure out where to get methylated B vitamins that you don't store, CoQ10 you haven't stored, and things like that. So that's the big piece. But I'm trying to put all this into a 10-minute nutshell. But if you're having trouble losing weight, if you're actually doing the work and you're doing the diet and you're just not getting there, research somatotype or somatotyping, research glycemic index, glycemic load. Those are going to be your big points. So what I'm eating, when people look at what I'm eating, and there's massive fasting involved when I'm doing, I'm running 47-1. But on the days I eat, like today's the day I eat, I'm going to have 2 pizzas, 3-ish big pieces of blueberry cheesecake, and about half of a pecan pie. Now, all of these things have been made. We made them all. There's no sugar in any of them. Extremely high fat, but that's all part of what we're trying to do. So what happens is when you start doing that, we're using the fiber to bind everything. All the chemical receptors in your mouth, your stomach, everything else see the giant amount of fat. They produce something called lipoprotein lipase, which is designed to digest that fat. And that's how we get these big spikes. It's how we're burning the fat at such a high level, still eating amazing foods and things like that. So the research that we're going to be putting on this is at Pillars of Wellness. If you guys are trying to get a hold of me, pillarsofwellness.com is a great one. You guys can also, toss stuff in the chat, share this type of stuff. One of the reasons that we're doing all these is that I want to have a record of this so that whenever I get to stage and we go pro, we can go back and watch this entire thing and watch the progression. But share this with your friends. I think there's going to be a lot of information that has not come out. And then on a daily, every time I do the daily check-ins about 2:30, we'll give some type of health tip. But, like I said, research is going to be at pillarsofwellness.com. And we'll have some of these videos up there as well. If you guys are trying to get a hold of me, that's a great way. But reach out in the comments and that type of thing as well. So research that somatotyping. It's a very big piece. I think that's going to be the key for a lot of you. That was the key for me to go from a 300-pound fat guy to 10% with the abs and everything else like that. So check that out. If you're trying to get a hold of me, hit us up in the comments. Talk to you guys later.